All those old bones. Now pull it together, Marty. So you're up to your crack in cobwebs, black mold, and human remains. Like you haven't squared away the odd punk in your time. But this was different. This place was like a gateway to hell. Everywhere he dug, more bones just below the surface. Mr. Barcelona never said anything about a dumping ground under the safe house. The guy gave him an address and made it clear what happens to thieves. Marty thought better of dissent. He thought even less of calling the oddly named Mr. Barcelona to ask, "What's up?" "Hey, boss, love the getaway cottage. The pea-stayed mattress is a good touch. And how did you know I like raccoons? Oh, also, regarding the 700 or 800 corpses in the crawlspace, should I just bury the drugs in and around them? Or can I move some of these fine folks to the shed out back? It'd be no trouble, honest." No, for the meantime, the 105 pounds of cocaine would just have to hang out in the open down there. But he had to call someone. His older cousin had been in this game for a lot longer than he had. Dealt with Mr. Barcelona and gotten out alive. Marty squeezed out of the trapdoor in the pantry and dusted himself off. He coughed, realizing that a significant amount of the clumpy pale dirt was made of people. Soylent soil, he thought to himself. It made his skin crawl a bit. After enough time in this job, Marty had little to no phobia of dead guys, but when that many jump out at you in a confined space, it can really mess with your noggin. Amenities were sparse and mostly rat-chewed, but at least there was a phone in the kitchen. Mr. Barcelona's associate was going to call him at some point, so leaving the house for any reason was a grave no-no. Unless the building was on fire, he guessed. Although, Marty thought, given the people he was dealing with, he'd still be better off inside. He picked up the receiver. It worked. He had his cousin's number memorized. He hacked it into the plastic keys like old yellow camel's teeth. No answer. Just before the machine kicked on, his cousin's stepmother picked up. "Bonjour." "Bonjour, Miss Lebeau. Maurice around?" "Is this Martin? I haven't seen Maurice all day, but I'll tell him you called." "Thank you. Just tell him my girlfriend and I got to the bed and breakfast safe and sound, and I just wanted to chat." Marty left the return number that was written on a small piece of cardstock under the cracked plastic window next to the dial pad and hung up. "There's a good lad. Just hang tight. The goods are going to be fine. Forget about the morbid foundation backfill for now and order a damn pizza." Jump scares always made him hungry. He turned up a water-warped phone book that was only half a dozen years old. On the upside, he figured, if one of these joints was still delivering, it must be all right? "Benny's Pizza and Pasta. Delivery or takeout?" "Zing, first try. Delivery, please. 3935 Gatwick Lane. Medium pepperoni and cheese. Hell, make it a large." I could be here for days, he thought. "One large pep and cheese, 3935 Gatwick Lane. That'll be $13.50. "Around here? That's downright criminal," he silently lamented. "Beauty, thanks," he replied curtly and hung up. He sat watching the phone, what he wouldn't do for a deck of cards. There was an empty pack of gum and a whisk in one of the drawers. Not exactly entertainment. He heard the shuffling of a rat in the pantry. Did the sucker wander up from the crawlspace? Did I forget to close the door? There was a light squeak, ba-bump. It sounded to Marty's trained ear like the crawlspace hatch being opened, then dropped shut from not very high at all. Maybe the height of a very buff rat. Maybe a possum. Maybe a skunk. Maybe the damn raccoon, like that one he'd scared out of the laundry room when he'd arrived. He slowly rounded the corner, wielding the phone book. He had a 9mm heater on the kitchen table in the rare case of any unforeseen tomfoolery. He also had the presence of mind to avoid drawing all the cops in town to his door, whilst blasting a rodent into the hereafter. He looked around the dim pantry. Nothing. No, not nothing. There was a silver button with a turquoise inlay. It was sitting at the lip of the closed hatch. Marty bent down to pick it up. A thread, which had at one point affixed it to its duds, was trailing into the crawlspace. He muttered to himself as he reassessed his choice of weapon. He returned later with the gat in hand and a pocket knife on the off chance he could take care of this quietly. He lowered his upper body in, one hand on the edge of the hole in case he had to make a hasty retreat. The light from the small grated window was just enough that his eyes could adjust to the darkest corners of the suburban tomb. Nobody. He dropped down and righted himself. Save for the few spots he dug up, there was little evidence that anyone had been here in a while. The duffel bags of cocaine as yet unmolested. "Goddamn rats," he said out loud, presumably to the goddamn rats. He couldn't leave all this product down here. The tenants would do a piss-poor job of keeping an eye on things, just a bunch of lousy layabouts. He'd have to shuffle it into the laundry room. A knock. Someone was at the door. It can't be the pizza. That wasn't even 10 minutes. He held his breath and didn't move. Another one. this time with a whimsical tap-ta-ta-ta. He slowly poked his head out of the hatch and crawled up, gun at the ready. Did he miss a call from the prestigious offices of Barcelona and Sons? Did some disfavorable gentry ascertain his locale and come to pay him a cordial howdy-do? An iciness crept up the back of his knees and settled in his spine. Another knock, sharper than the first two, almost sent him ass over percolator, inarticulately ventilating the door with lead. They knew he was here. They weren't going to leave. "Be with you in a moment, just on the shitter," he called out to the 7-foot-tall, heavily armed goon on the far side of that thin luan. The frail Scottish voice that came back was decidedly less imposing. "Oh, no rush, dear. It's Martha Scown from across the way. We just thought we'd pop over and welcome you to the neighbourhood." Marty tucked the piece in the back of his pants and did a less than adequate job of brushing off the dust from his jeans. He flattened his hair and opened the door a generous crack. The old lady stood with an equally frail old man. When he was assured they probably weren't strapped, he opened it the rest of the way. "Hello," he said. Suspicious? I'm not suspicious, no siree. "Oh, hello there, Martha." She held out one half of a queenly handshake. "And this is—" Simon Bonetti. I live 3 doors down." He moved from one awkwardly hovering handshake to the other. Martha looked at the dirt on Marty's knees and made the face that you make when a 2-year-old brings you something fascinating like a leaf or a rock. "Oh, renovating, are you? This old place needs it. Our friend who lived here before you did passed away not too long ago now. Wasn't much of an interior designer as well, I think you can see." "Oh, Martha, don't scare the boy." Simon looked from his friend to Marty. "He didn't die in the house if you're the sort to be worried about that kind of thing." He gave a wink the way only the elderly can. Martha thrust a shoebox she'd been holding into Marty's unsuspecting arms. "Some muffins and a bottle of wine. We're glad to have a little fresh blood around here. We'll best let you get back to your ministrations." They quickly turned and left. Thank you," he got out, but they were already making their way down the walk. He turned back inside and thumbed the deadbolt shut. The interaction being so saccharine it was bordering on upsetting. But there was something a bit off. Marty couldn't imagine the type of character that would have lived in this slum being friends with such lovely people. And what's with the welcoming gift? A recycled orthopedic shoebox lined with lavender tissue paper and muffins that were still giving off a dull heat. Did she just have a batch and a spare Pinot Noir in the chamber before he even arrived? And one more thing that was tickling at the base of his lizard's brain. What had she said? Something about passed away not too long ago now. They were getting a bit spongy between the ears. The bodies, the ones he'd seen anyhow, must have been more than a good few years, maybe a decade. The bugs down there could have made short work of the softer bits, but the clothes, some of them were properly old. Mr. Barcelona and Company must have been using it as a repository for a long time and paying little heed to the silent demand of upkeep. He sat down at the kitchen table and stuffed a muff in his mouth. He read the label of the wine out loud with his mouth full, taking care to apply all of the poncy hoity-toity it warranted, with its notes of smoked cherry and autumn fog. Whatever autumn fog was supposed to taste like. The cork even had one of those foil condoms. He didn't bother looking for a corkscrew, just opened his trusty buck and began digging. Once he was too far for the knife to reach, he thumbed the rest of the ragged cork down into the bottle. Sure, he'd be picking it out of his teeth, but considering the atmosphere, the maitre d' probably wouldn't mind. Marty imagined the head waiter of this fine dining establishment was busy smoking rocks in his underwear out back. "What? No wine glasses?" he objected, giving the cupboards one last cursory look for even the most ragged of drinking vessels. "Monsieur Barcelona, you shan't be getting a tip." It was good wine. Not that he had the refined palate for that sort of thing, but he could definitely taste the autumn fog. A few corky swigs into it, and he felt like it was time for his favorite team to make it to the Super Bowl. Go Browns! Booze always did that to him. A sort of self-aware IBS. Miraculous, the bowl had water in it. The tank even had water in it. This toilet looked like it was pulled up from the bottom of a lake, but at least it worked. He realized only too late that the toilet paper was absent. An unladen wooden dowel jutted mockingly from the edge of the bathroom counter. Marty went into a kind of panic shared closely by the beshitted and those that remembered too late that the stove was still on. "Calm down, old bean. That tissue paper in the orthopedic muffin casket is still out there." Marty just couldn't bear to perform the waddle of shame. Even if nobody was watching, it felt wrong. He stretched over and flipped open the cupboard under the sink. Well, it wasn't toilet paper, but it was something. A stack of nudie mags had come to his rescue. He grabbed one, praying to the Almighty that the paper inside was cheap, unglossy newsprint. Not that he had been in this exact circumstance before, but he had speculated the high-quality centerfold probably wasn't the easiest on the old starfish. He flipped open the first page. Damn! He was met with a vivid, buxom lass clad in baby oil and wide mesh, her wildly impractical alabaster breasts like fresh pizza dough slung in a halibut net. He apologized unceremoniously as he extracted the intellectual article and began vigorously crumpling. A noise. That same creak, ba-bump. He stopped crumpling and listened. A raspy sound like something sliding across the floor, and then another ba-bump. He grabbed another skin rag from the stack and flung it hard into the hall. He listened for scampering. Nothing. No worse time for a man to be caught off his guard than when he has his pants around his ankles. He finished up faster than any man in history and grabbed his gun off the sink. Throwing the hatch open, he dropped down the hole like an Italian plumber. God-damned empty! What the hell was going on? He crawled across the dirt catacomb to the open window in the crawlspace. It was barred, and the latch was rusted into an immovable mass. He couldn't see any other ways in or out. He got out his lighter and crawled across the floor to the darker parts. The ground was looser, a more contemporary addition, he thought. A small chrome glimmer caught his attention. It was the button with a turquoise inlay. Must have fallen out of his pocket as he was crawling. He adjusted his own body in the awkward small space and reached over to pick it up. The button was still attached to the cuff of a white linen shirt, still adorning a mummified wrist. The corpse was wearing excessively gaudy bracelets. More turquoise at that. Against his better judgment, he shuffled over to where the other arm should be just below the loose heath. Just as he suspected. No button. A shadow passed by the small muddied window. He spun around. Someone was outside. Marty never fancied himself the overly paranoid type, but in this business it was more of a survival skill. Had they seen the glow of his lighter? Maybe it was the 7-foot heavily armed goon, or just some hooligan kid. The knock on the door again, slower, unmistakably menacing to Marty's ear. He clambered out into the hall, adjusted his sweaty grip on the gun behind his back, and swung the door open. The man on the porch sported a paisley bandana and a purple teardrop tattoo, prison style, gangbanger, got wise about the safe house and came to liberate the goods. Marty's gun was in his face before he realized the pizza box in the man's hands. The pizza thug's eyes bugged out of his head. Take it, man, no charge! Marty grabbed the guy's shirt and yanked him inside. He tucked the gun into his pants and pinched a fingerful of bills out of his wallet, probably 3 times the price of the pizza. He stuffed it into the delivery man's front pocket, looked out into the street to see if anyone had witnessed the scene. All clear. He patted the man's bulging lapel and grabbed the pie out of his hands. Had some break-ins lately, bit jumpy, keep the change. The delivery man nodded quickly as he backed out the door. Enjoy, he said as he half ran back to his car. Marty tossed the pizza box onto the table and slumped into the chair, exhausted. He sat with his eyes closed, massaging his temple with the slide of his gun. He set it down on the table and looked into the hall. He sighed, got up, and dragged the table over. Now he could at least see to the door to the pantry. When he was sure everything was finally in order, he grabbed a slice and a chewy swig of the Pinot. Marty had made it halfway through the bottle and 3/4 of the pizza when the phone rang. Marty's mausoleum, he briefly considered before remembering his audience. Damn, that wine was starting to hit. Hey-o, he said into the receiver. Hey, slugger, it's Maurice. Ah, Mr. Busypants finally has a minute for his baby cuz. I'm guessing from your message you're at the new safe house, babysitting a few kilos? Marty soaked in the ambience of the kitchen once more. Yes, lovely spot. Could use a can of paint, though, and some mold remover, and an exorcist. This place has some of Mr. B's undesirables stacked up under the crawlspace like Gam's canned peaches. Marty listened for Maurice to respond. How do you mean? His cousin sounded confused. Concerned? I mean, he's been using the foundation of this place as a corpse warehouse for years, judging by the look of them. Marty rubbed his face with his palm. The wine was giving him the spins. Marty turned to look into the listing hallway. He waited for the ba-bump. The magazine he had tossed earlier laying open to where it had landed. The spread-eagled redhead with tastefully matched carpet and drapes seemed to writhe sensuously. Something in the shadow of the pantry door moved. That's not possible. He buys those safe houses for a month, tops, liquidates it and moves on. Keeps the heat down. Marty only vaguely heard what Maurice had said. He strained to focus on the shape. A hand? Then a glint from the kitchen light caught the Caribbean blue of turquoise bracelets. Marty. Hey, Marty, what are you saying about the bodies in the crawlspace? Marty? But Marty was elsewhere. The aperture of consciousness narrowing on an arm as dry as papyrus sliding out along the floor. A glossy centerfold of Miss Virginia J. Pussy dancing him to sleep. Do you know how many acolytes gave their lives to prepare the resting place for the Divine One? Only for you to crawl in there with your filth and sin! Marty's eyes focused on the blue-haired elderly librarian, beaded glasses chain and all, standing far too close. Her breath was like dry meat in Werther's. And you, disgusting heathen! Marty lolled his head over to see an old man looking like he returned from lawn bowling, red in the face, pointing an arthritic finger like a dagger. You had to wake him up! He punctuated with jabs of the finger as Martha Scown held a soothing hand on his arm. We should have fought harder to keep the bank from reclaiming the house. He flapped his arms like a large, fancy toddler having a tantrum. Marty realized he was on the kitchen table. His ankles and wrists were tied with thick plastic baling cord. His fingers were pins and needles. The gag in his mouth tasted like a stale dish rag. But now that he's awake, said Simon Benetti from the other side of the table, shaking his head, he must eat. Every person in the room, a dozen at least, echoed, He must eat! He must eat! Marty writhed like a fish in a boat. A dozen withered hands held him down. The group parted at his feet. Marty's stomach lurched as he saw two elderly men carrying a mummified corpse like it was their drunk friend. Bones, dried organs, and sinew were visible beneath the rotting linen gown. The head, Marty saw in frantic, blithering horror, was moving in uncoordinated twitches and jerks, the sickeningly too wide mouth opening and closing like a trap. Marty began to hyperventilate. His adrenaline kicked in as he broke free of the hands holding him down. He flopped onto the floor with a heavy pop. His shoulder was dislocated, but he couldn't feel it. The two men carrying the corpse dropped it on the ground. It crumpled into a rickety heap and began to elongate towards Marty. He screamed through the gag. The audience stood back as he tried to inch his way across the floor. The animated dead thing began to slide towards him, its mouth gaping, its jaw distorting like a snake. The arms adorned with turquoise and silver slowly came around. The fingers splayed to grab. It started with his cowboy boots. Its wide mouth worked up and around his ankles. The hands clutching his jeans pulled him down into its throat. Marty kicked and flailed. The desiccated thing flopped around on the end of his legs as he tried to fling it off, but it never slowed. It was up to his waist now. The onlookers stood, unmoving, as the horror played out on the linoleum. The boss was right. It was indeed the shit-ugliest lot on the block, thought Gus as he drove by looking for signs of life. He knew his quarry was undoubtedly not in residence. That's what happened with runners, kind of the point. With any luck, he could find some evidence to track him down. Mr. Barcelona was particularly furious. He had confidence in this one, but his associate had called the house 3 times to arrange a drop, and 3 times the phone had rung off the hook. Gus parked around the side of the block and put on a pair of black gloves. He grabbed the suppressed Walther out of the glove box and approached from the alleyway. A gray Ford was in the covered carport behind the house. Strange, he thought, but not too strange. Maybe he trucked the drugs out in a different car. Maybe an accomplice. It was too much to carry on the bus. Gus approached the back door carefully, watching for movement. A flicker of something in that small, dark cellar window behind the weeds. Probably just a reflection off the street lamp. Old cat? Possum? The lights were all off. A half bottle of wine and a pizza box with a single slice sat in the corner. He clicked on the flashlight. Hello? Marty? Just coming around for a wellness check. Nobody can get a hold of you. Man, it was worth a shot. A nudie mag lay open in the hall, though a breeze had since flipped the page to a cigarette ad. There was a floor hatch to a dirt cellar in the pantry. It was open. He finished a sweep of the house. No sign of the goods. Then he shone his light down into the cellar. It was a shallow floor, more of a crawl space. He lowered his head in cautiously. It gave him the creeps. He shone his light around and spotted, to his amazement, 4 large duffel bags. No way. No goddamn way, he said out loud, dropping down into the hole and hobbling over to the luggage. He unzipped one of the bags. Full. Then the other 3. All full. The whole stash was still right here. This was a career first. He crawled back into the pantry and went straight to the kitchen phone. Hey, boss. Yeah, it's Gus. No, that's just the thing. He's nowhere to be seen. But the drugs are all still here. Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I'll bring 'em back. He hung up and went to the pantry. He dropped his flashlight down into the dirt and climbed into the hole feet first. His leg snagged on something. He tried to shake it off, but whatever it was had wrapped around his ankle. A hand! He began to panic, shaking his leg violently. Then he felt the teeth. It's funny, he never once thought of the gun that he had left sitting next to the phone. The muted shrieking could hardly be heard down in the dirt cellar below the pantry. The woman across the alleyway saw the flashlight beam play on the weeds outside the cellar window. She had watched the hitman sneak in from the comfort of her back deck. The more the merrier, she figured. More would undoubtedly come. After all, he must eat.